These are the Arizona Cardinals. Had a lot of big moves in the offseason, and it's paid off so far 11-5 as they head into the final week. And it's going to be interesting where they end up seeding out in the NFC playoffs in this new field of 7 teams. But here with me to talk about the Cardinals and their success in the desert is longtime Cardinals fan Joe Comeau. Joe, thank you so much for being on the podcast and taking part.
Yeah, Earl, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to get to talk about the Cardinals anytime I get a chance. So I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, and I really appreciate you being able to do this. As we were talking about prior to getting on here, I had the toughest time trying to find a Cardinals fan and scouring the internet, crowdsourcing, doing everything and being able to find a Cardinals fan because I felt like I didn't want to do this without having everybody accounted for. And I feel like it wouldn't be right to not have the Cardinals in the mix because they are in the mix. They're going to the playoffs. And in fact, they really had an impact on how the NFC was going early on in the season. And I mean, things still can go that way as we head into the playoffs because we know the Cardinals have their spot punched into the postseason. It's just going to be where the seeding will be.
Yeah, it's a smaller fan base, and that's what happens when you don't have a lot of long-term success. And the Cardinals have not had much success, which has been making a fan interesting. But yeah, I'm not surprised you had a hard time finding one of us. I'm glad you found me. Again, I'm happy to be here talking Cardinals.
And I'm glad that you're able to be here. The first thing what we do is we normally ask the guests, how did you become a Cardinals fan, and what was the attraction to them, and what led to you to being a fan between all the good and bad?
Well, I was born in Arizona. I don't live in Arizona now. My career has actually brought me to the state of Georgia. So I'm on the East Coast like you are. But yeah, I was living in Arizona when the Cardinals moved there in 1988. I'm old enough. I was like 13 when that happened. I wasn't a huge sports fan then, but I cared enough about sports that they immediately became my hometown team. And over the years, gotten to be much more interested in sports at a deeper level. I was probably in the early 90s, I started watching NFL draft every year and have been watching it every year since. So it's a team that is now representing the state I'm from. And I've been a fan since pretty much they moved there and have stuck with them all the way through all the rough seasons, and it's good to see them finally winning.
And interestingly enough, I feel like aside from the Suns, the Cardinals really started leading that momentum towards more sports teams coming to Arizona, followed up by the Diamondbacks and then the Coyotes. And I know regardless of how strange that situation is with the Coyotes, the fact that Arizona and the Phoenix area in general has become a metropolitan area that is suitable for all the teams in the major sports, I think that's huge.
Yeah, the Phoenix area has grown immensely. I moved away in 2008 to go to grad school in Texas, but from the time I lived there, I saw how much it grew. And it's interesting. It was a very different world when the Cardinals moved because they moved to Arizona and they played at Sun Devil Stadium, which is actually the stadium that Arizona State University plays in. That's been there forever. And it wasn't a great stadium for a pro team. It's funny, like today, if you want to attract an NFL team to your city, you better have a stadium plan to build them a stadium. And they moved there without that. But yeah, it was the Suns there forever. And that was the only major professional team. There was the Phoenix Firebirds, a AAA affiliate of the New York Giants that were really popular. But the Suns was the only game in town for a long time. And then the Cardinals moved there. And then eventually they got the expansion Diamondbacks who delivered the only major, professional championship to the city. And then the Coyotes moved there. And now, it has become one of a short list of 4 sports cities. Now, how long it stays with everything, as you reference, going on with the Coyotes, it's hard to know. That's a short list of cities. So it's become one of those big sports towns, and the Cardinals absolutely helped lead the charge on that.
What is your most memorable moment as a Cardinals fan? Was it the most recent Super Bowl? Was there anything else in particular? I know, as you mentioned, sometimes the success was a bit lean down in Arizona. So to you, what is the most memorable Cardinals moment?
So I'm going to give you 2, one that haunts my nightmares and one that was a very kind of, just for me, a special fan moment that I think is just kind of unique. The one that haunts my nightmares is James Harrison returning that darn interception, however many yards in the Super Bowl, going into halftime. It's not even like James Harrison was like the fastest player on the field. He's kind of an outside edge rusher, and he picked off Kurt Warner, ran it back, and I'm like, just tackle him. And, obviously that was part of the Super Bowl that the Cardinals lost. But the memory to me that is just kind of special is back in the 1998 season, the Cardinals made the playoffs for what I believe was the first time since they had moved to Arizona with quarterback Jake Plummer, who the Cardinals had drafted in the second round, and he had played at Arizona State University, so his legend had already begun in the Phoenix area, and then the Cardinals drafted him, and it was kind of this really perfect kind of storm of this player that was already popular in the Valley becoming a potential legend that it didn't quite work out in terms of his career with the Cardinals, but they made the playoffs in 1998, and they went into Dallas and beat the Cowboys. And the Cowboys are probably the team I dislike the most in the NFL. So it was particularly sweet that the Cardinals, in their first playoff appearance in my time following them as a fan, went into Dallas, beat the Cowboys. And I remember they were flying home, and someone had announced, I don't know if I heard it on the radio or wherever, that fans were being invited to congregate at this kind of open field or kind of lot that was adjacent to the airport. And they were going to taxi up the plane, have kind of a platform out there, and the players and coaches and a few other folks were going to come out and address the crowd. So I went down there to this open gravel lot or whatever it was next to the Sky Harbor Airport. They taxied the plane there, and I was out there with I don't know how many people there. This has been 20 something years. There were probably a couple thousand people out there, and and the team came out and addressed the fans. And I think there were a few other local prominent figures, like the late John McCain, a prominent political figure in Arizona, was out there. He was an avid Cardinals fan. And it was one of those things that I don't think it was on TV. It's just one of those moments that I was able to go and celebrate that, the energy, the emotion. And it's a unique experience that only me and however many other people who happened to be there that day got to experience. So that for me is the thing that's most memorable and very personal, so to speak, in terms of the Cardinals.
Yeah, and I can only imagine, like you said, the success at first time making the playoffs since they had moved from St. Louis. One thing I want to ask you, going into the season, what were the expectations? I know finishing 8-8 last year, they had a really strong start before regressing to 500. But what was the thought about what was going in, especially this year? No Patrick Peterson, no Larry Fitzgerald. What were you thinking they could do, especially in an NFC West where you always have to worry about Seattle, you have to worry about the Rams, and then, of course, the Niners were coming off a weird season after post-Super Bowl hangover, and you didn't know what to expect. What were you expecting the Cardinals could do in a competitive division?
You're right. The NFC West has been, for the last 5 or 6 years, widely viewed as arguably the best division in football. And you had 4 teams, any one of which coming in would not shock someone if they made the playoffs. So the Cardinals had an uphill climb. There was this mix of optimism and concern because, under Kliff Kingsbury, they've improved every year, right? They went from having the first overall pick, drafting Kyler Murray, which obviously you're not a good team if you have the first overall pick, to winning 5 games and then 8 games. But there was concern because they also collapsed down the stretch last season. They had 2 games against the Rams in San Francisco where all they had to do was beat one of those teams. And both of those teams were playing like third-string quarterbacks. And if the Cardinals could have won either of those games, they would have made the playoffs, and they lost both. So even though they improved, the way it ended left a bad taste in the mouth of a lot of Cardinals fans. But, in the offseason, you're right, Patrick Peterson did move on. But, Patrick Peterson over the last couple of years had kind of been a shell of himself. If you followed all PFF's grades, his grades have declined over the last number of years. And he drew, I think it was 12 penalties last year at flags, which led all cornerbacks. Moving on from him actually was not a concern to me because he just wasn't the player he used to be. So I actually felt like the guy they signed, Malcolm Butler, who ended up retiring, was going to be as good or better. But they had brought in a lot of, I think, important players. Obviously, J.J. Watt, we were excited to sign him. I think one of the biggest moves was center Rodney Hudson they traded for, and that was a huge upgrade. James Conner, they brought in a lot of pieces that I was actually pretty excited about the team, but I try to have a little bit tempered expectations because it's such a tough division. So I felt like they were going to be 10-7 and vying for a playoff spot. Coming in, I felt like they were going to be second or third in the division. I felt like the Rams were going to win the division. Cardinals and Seahawks, I thought, were going to be fighting for second place. And I thought the 49ers would be at the back end because I didn't trust their quarterback situation. It's looking like I was right about the Cardinals and Rams and not so much about Seahawks and the 49ers. But, I had some optimism, but, the way it ended last year and the tough division, I didn't see them starting out the way they did going into the season.
Was there a particular moment in the season you thought, okay, last year's collapse is in the past. What was a particular game that made you feel extremely good about how they're playing? Was it the win against the Rams? Was it the win against the Niners, or was it any other particular win on there? In fact, you swept the season series with the Niners, so you had to feel extremely good about that.
I mean, all those games made me feel good. And certainly, beating the Rams is sort of getting the monkey off our back, as they say, because Sean McVay had been 8-0 against the Cardinals, right? So we got that, we can't beat Sean McVay thing off of our back. And that was a huge game. But honestly, the game where I first felt like, okay, you know what, this season might be different was week 1, where they blew out the Titans. Because, yeah, it's very early. It's only 1-0, but the Titans were supposed to be one of the best teams in the AFC. And as it turns out, they are here down the stretch. But the Cardinals, in fact, when I looked at their schedule and kind of plotted out, these are the games I think we'll win, these are the ones I think we'll lose, that was one I thought they were going to lose. And they blew out the Titans. So right from there, I'm like, okay, this year's going to be different. And then they went on and they won against the Vikings in a game that the Vikings probably should have won. That the Vikings missed that last minute field goal, but they went and they kept rolling and beating the Rams. That definitely kind of brought it to the next level. And then going 7-0, that first half of the season, even their first loss was to a very good Green Bay team. And you're like, man, yeah, this team is for real. So yeah, coming out of the gate, I felt like this was something different.
Was there a particular game that made you very, very worried about the play of the team? Was it the Lions' loss? Was it the loss to the Panthers?
So the loss to the Panthers didn't concern me a lot because they were starting the backup quarterback, Colt McCoy. Kyler Murray was injured. They won 2 out of 3 with Colt McCoy. And, when you're bringing in a backup quarterback, you don't expect them to be consistent. If they're consistent, they're starters somewhere else. So the Panthers game didn't concern me at all. The Lions game really concerned me because that was a bad loss to a team that had 2 wins up to that point, and they had Kyler Murray back, so they should have won. That's the one that really concerned me, and also it hurts that it was part of a stretch of like 3 losses in a row that they had. So yeah, that was the game that concerned me the most. Coming back and having a flat showing against the Colts concerned me also. The Colts are a good team, so there's no shame in losing to them. But that stretch right there with those losses, including the Lions loss, definitely was the point in the season where like, is it the same old Cardinals? Are they going to have that late season collapse like they did last year?
Looking at the NFC playoff picture, who is the team that you feel like the Cardinals match up the best with in the NFC? Is it the Rams? Is it Tampa? Is it Dallas? Is it someone else that we haven't even mentioned yet?
Just going on recent history, I'm going to say Dallas. The Cardinals blew out the Cowboys last year. And then this year, the Cowboys were coming back and they wanted payback. And if you looked at that game going in, the Cardinals had a lot of players out due to injury and COVID. And the Cowboys were not nearly as banged up. And the Cardinals had come off the loss from the Colts and then, 2 weeks out from the loss from the Lions. So everyone thought that the Cowboys were going to beat the Cardinals, if not roll them. And the Cardinals came out and, kind of took command of the game very early. Cowboys made a push late, but the Cardinals won. So the Cardinals beat them badly last year. They beat them under difficult circumstances with all the injuries. And the Cardinals' run defense has not been good this year, but for whatever reason, they shut down the Cowboys. The Cowboys had 45 yards rushing, and 20 of that was Dak Prescott. And last year, I think they forced a couple fumbles, against Ezekiel Elliott. So for whatever reason, the Cardinals recently seem to have matched up well against the Cowboys.
Who's the team in the NFC that scares you when it comes to the playoffs? Who's the team that you're hoping, if you don't have to see until the conference championship game, that you can avoid the longest?
It's Tampa Bay. I know Green Bay beat the Cardinals early in the year, and Aaron Rodgers is such a talented quarterback. But the Cardinals were right in that Green Bay game, and they had a chance right up until that misplay at the end with A.J. Green not turning around. But the thing that scares me about Tampa Bay is, one, they're a veteran team with a veteran coach and Tom Brady at quarterback. And the Cardinals are a team with a young coach and young quarterback. They've got some veterans in the locker room, certainly, that help out. But when you're a team that's in the playoffs, that's young, that's hopefully ascending, I think the teams that are a bad matchup for you are the teams that are veteran-laden and have been there. And Tom Brady knows how to win in the playoffs. And the Cardinals are hoping to learn how to do that. So that's the matchup that concerns me the most, particularly because the Cardinals defense has been good through most of the year. They've actually been a top 10 defense, but Tom Brady to pick apart and expose our cornerbacks that are, a little bit young and have had some struggles. So that's definitely the matchup that concerns me.
And it's interestingly, it seems like the weakness of Tampa Bay has been teams with mobile quarterbacks and big running games, and that looks like something that Arizona could do. If you look at the Washington game and you look at both New Orleans games, they had a way with keeping Brady off the field and really stifling him. And it looks like, while there is concern as a Cardinals fan, that they might have the recipe to pull off an upset and dethrone the champs.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we're a scary matchup for them too. And I'll say, and one thing that I've experienced as a fan this year that I don't remember ever experiencing, this is the first year I remember where I'd say going into any game, I felt like the Cardinals had a chance to win, no matter who they were playing. Now, during that tough stretch, I lost that feeling a little bit. But if the Cardinals are healthy and they're not going through a rough stretch, but they're playing the way they were earlier in the season, I think they can beat anyone in the league on a good day. They're so talented when they're healthy and when they're right.
One question I wanted to ask you before we go to our Super Bowl prediction. Kliff Kingsbury, interestingly enough, a prime example of what a college coach can do going to the NFL as opposed to being the polar opposite of someone like Urban Meyer or even Nick Saban. When he became the head coach, and you talked about his progression going from 5 to 8 to now playoff contender, what were your thoughts on how he's been able to adjust to the NFL game? And when you heard the thoughts about him possibly going back to the college ranks in the middle of the season, at least his name was speculated about, were there any concerns as a fan about would there be any distractions and anything else that would go along?
Yeah, so certainly when the Cardinals hired him, there were a lot of people who questioned it because you look at the record, Texas Tech, and he had a losing record there. And sometimes, you have to look a little deeper. And when you look, okay, Texas Tech is competing against all those really great teams there in Texas for recruits and everything. And you look at it, his offenses were always really good. The teams just didn't have the winning records in part because of defense. And I think you're going to have a hard time recruiting top defensive talent there. So I was optimistic. He came in and the offense was a middle of the pack in the NFL and in his first year. And there were some promising signs and there were some things that he was having to adapt, but it does seem like he's adapted. I do still have some concerns with some of the play calling in games, but the one thing you always hear about him is he works very hard. He is in the building early, and that's such a cliche thing to say, but like our previous head coach, Bruce Arians, I love Bruce Arians, but he was a guy who wasn't the first one in, last one out. He'd been coaching forever, and he knows his stuff, and I love Bruce. I'm not trying to be critical of him, but when you've got a coach who works hard, shows up, and is smart, which I believe Kingsbury is, I think that's a combination that he's going to figure it out. So I felt good about it. It does seem like he's made improvements and he's growing. So I'm fine about that. Now, in terms of, the whole rumor of whether he was going to go back to the college ranks, when I heard that Kingsbury's got another year on his contract, and I know there are ways out of those things, my take was, someone leaked that, probably his agent, to try to get him some leverage for negotiating an extension with the Cardinals. He kind of, smartly just kind of played it kind of, he just didn't really comment about it. He neither shot it down nor confirmed it. And it ended up being nothing because they ended up hiring someone anyway. But, I saw it and I thought, no, this is all about leverage for his contract. So I wasn't really worried about him going back to the college game this year.
You mentioned that Kliff Kingsbury is an intelligent guy and been able to make adjustments. And I know we're going to keep intertwining him with Urban Meyer, but he seems to be a very good people person and being able to stick to his word and having his players believe in him. That's the key.
Yeah, that's the thing you hear is the players really love him and he's a player's coach. And in fact, there are some folks in the Cardinals fan base who are critical. They feel like he's too soft on the players or whatever, or they need more discipline. And, the Cardinals have had some trouble with offensive penalties, a lot of false starts. So I guess there's some fodder to believe that. But he seems like a guy who thus far has done a good job of, saying the right things, doing the right things, working hard. And, Urban Meyer is the guy who came in with a big reputation and a long track record in history in college. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know him and I don't want to make too many speculative thoughts on that, but it at least feels like Urban Meyer came in just kind of expecting to be able to just succeed on the merit of his accomplishments and his system. And I don't know, the whole thing about him not flying back with the team and all this stuff, like that just doesn't feel like a guy who's working and committed to the process the way a guy like Kliff Kingsbury is, who's always at the facility. So yeah, it does feel different. It feels like a guy in Urban Meyer who felt like he'd arrived and was relying on his track record, whereas you've got a guy like Kliff Kingsbury who feels like he's got something to prove. And I'll take the guy who's smart, works hard, and has something to prove every day.
Going to the Super Bowl prediction, who do you have coming out of the NFC? Who do you have coming out of the AFC? What's the final score and who wins?
Okay. So the AFC, I'm going to go with Kansas City right now. They started out slow and everyone kind of forgot about them. And then they kind of done better down the stretch. The AFC is a little bit of a mess. It's hard to know who the great teams are over there. Every team over there has been flawed and had some bad stretches, but Mahomes is such a great quarterback and Andy Reid is such an experienced coach. I'm going to go with Kansas City finding a way to come out of the AFC. NFC, I originally was going to go with Tampa Bay because of Brady. He is the GOAT, as they say, but that just felt too boring. I didn't want to go, a repeat. So I'm going with Green Bay. I think Green Bay is probably the best team in the NFC right now. I went with Green Bay and Kansas City, and I went ahead and had Kansas City with the win on that. Score, I think it would be probably a high scoring game. These are two teams. Neither of these teams are great defenses. So maybe something like 34-28 or something like that, Kansas City. If Belichick isn't in that game, Belichick's the only coach today that I feel like if he's in the Super Bowl, it could be a weird, 13-3 or a blowout, or he just has that mastermind coaching ability to coach up games that become blowouts or dominant defensive performances. But I feel like every other team in the league besides a Belichick coach team, it's going to be kind of a shootout or a boat race.
Joe, I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to do this, and I really appreciate you coming on because, really, like I mentioned, Cardinals fans were hard to find, and you might be my go-to guy from now on every time the Cardinals make the playoffs. Before we wrap this up, what are ways people can reach out to you, and do you have any shout-outs, anything you'd like to promote?
Yeah, so the best place to find me, I actually have a YouTube channel where I do Arizona Cardinals content. I launched it in April, and I've been fortunate enough that it's grown, and I've got a wonderful community of subscribers, and I'm a little over 2,000 subscribers about 8 months in. So I've been really fortunate the way it's grown, and it's called The Cardinal Rule. The Cardinal Rule, Cardinal Single. I kind of went on that old kind of saying and a play on words there. And if you go to my YouTube channel and subscribe, you'll find links to my Twitter and Instagram. I'm most active on Twitter. Twitter is kind of a play on my name, Joe Comeau. It's JOKOMO 13. But the easiest thing is just find the Cardinal Rule YouTube, and you'll find links to all my socials there.